Hey, how's it going, guys? Pat here. I just wanted to talk a bit about the new Democratic presidential frontrunner, Bernie Sanders, his agenda, some radical elements of his ideology, and to generally explain why I think he would be a disastrous president for the United States. Now, to give a little background on the man in question, Bernie Sanders was born on September 8th, 1941 in Brooklyn, making him 78 years old right now. It seems he's been in politics for almost as long. He's best known for, in the 60s, being part of the civil rights movement, where he fulminated against police brutality and the segregation of white businesses, and he's lauded for that in the public media. But what is crucially omitted from Sanders' historical reputation is his long-held association with anti-American and pro-communist groups in the Soviet Union and here domestically in the United States. While at the University of Chicago in the early 1960s, when he famously marched on Washington and demanded for racial equality, Sanders joined some quite infamous socialist groups that had sympathies with the Marxist-Leninist regime in the Soviet Union and which very much tied towards communism in the Western Hemisphere. According to the Washington Examiner, Sanders admitted to being affiliated with the Socialist Workers' Party in the 1980 and 1984 elections, and this was during the time of severe enmity between the United States and the Soviet Union. That party was endorsing Marxist candidates against Ronald Reagan. Last year, the Washington Examiner further exposed Sanders' communist past by publishing tapes of his honeymoon in 1988, wherein he visited the Soviet Union with his wife and praised the rulers, absolutely disparaged capitalism, and extolled the virtues of communism during his visit. Now, Sanders identifies right now as a democratic socialist, and I find that label disingenuous. He probably finds it disingenuous as well. The fact of the matter is, for an individual that is affiliated with communist and far-left Marxist organizations for as long as Bernie Sanders had, those ideas are inculcated in his mind. Those ideologies have been developed extensively throughout his career, and he cannot shake that off for a more innocuous version of far-left politics. He's labeling himself a democratic socialist because he's afraid of the backlash if he labels himself a communist, which is what he actually is. And labeling Bernie Sanders a communist, which is an accurate description of his political orientation, is not catastrophizing. It's not saying the worst of the Democratic Party. It's simply commenting on the state of how Bernie Sanders, in being a frontrunner, how he has shaped the Democratic Party, how the Democratic Party has moved unilaterally to the left, and I think it's important to go over some of his proposals and see how they would affect the country. No, so many teachers excoriate Wikipedia because they find it inaccurate or simply elitist and don't like how anyone can publish on Wikipedia. There's a very nice graphic on Wikipedia that shows all the Democratic nominee or Democratic candidates' views on certain issues, and they give sources and they give different explanations and nuances if they partially support a proposal. And I'll link that down in the description below, but I just want to analyze some of Bernie Sanders' ostensible stances based on that graphic and what we know of him. The first chart discusses candidate support for education proposals. It indicates that Sanders supports debt-free college, 4 years of free college, public college. It indicates that he supports canceling debt, that he supports universal pre-K, increasing funding for primary and secondary education, universal child care. So basically towing the socialist line, all these social democratic programs that he believes or he claims to believe will have a beneficial impact on the country. And obviously he's very good at sounding glib and sounding volubly sincere. These all sound like good proposals. Once you get around to it, you obviously don't have any means of paying for it, but Sanders has a very attuned politician's mind in dealing with economic proposals and in kind of lambasting any economic rejection or any economic questions against his proposals. He plans a massive government intervention into the private enterprise, which he rather spuriously believes will increase equality, increase income equality. He endorses mandatory paid sick leave, mandatory paid family leave. These are obviously all very popular proposals, but they're popular because people do not understand the financial implications that they would have. And Sanders proposes to pay for all these proposals with a wealth tax, with increased property taxes, with increased income taxes. And these are all inane possibilities that will absolutely erode our American capitalism, which is what he wants to do. He believes that the system is unfair, even though recent polls have indicated that Americans, a vast majority of Americans are satisfied with their lives, satisfied with their wallets and their incomes. And so he believes that we need a massive overhaul of our capitalist system, even though people are doing very well. The economy is soaring, the stock market is way up, and Bernie Sanders still does not get it. Sanders and other top Democrats have this unfounded anecdotal conviction that the economy is rigged against the lower class, and this disregards the fact that since Donald Trump's election, for all his faults, the economy has absolutely boomed. The bottom 50% of income earners in the United States have seen a 47% increase in their wealth, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics. The economy in recent months has added about over 260 or to 275,000 jobs. I think recently it might have even been more each month. And we see this in the consumer confidence is sky high. The public's interpretation of President Trump's handling, even though the public is, according to polls, seems not too keen on the president just in terms of approval rating. The approval rating of his economy is very high. And so this kind of indicates that Bernie Sanders and his socialist horde are out of touch with the American economy. But Bernie Sanders' support for economic policies that would debilitate the American economy is only half of the problem with his candidacy. You know that Sanders campaigned in the Soviet Union and that he worked actively to undermine U.S. interests in the 1980s and during the presidency of Ronald Reagan. But what is even more personally important at this moment is that Sanders continues to undermine the sovereignty of the United States at home and abroad. Sanders supports, he does not support the legitimacy of the President Juan Guaido of Venezuela. Obviously, Venezuela is a failed socialist experiment that Bernie Sanders might want to make the U.S. emulate. He has repeatedly extolled Venezuela in the past. He believed that the Venezuelan dream, or that the people of Venezuela echoed the American dream even more so than the people of America, and something like that. That is a true quote. You can look that up. Bernie Sanders has repeatedly called for the United States to massively decrease its military budget, to decrease our standing in the world and in international affairs, and to pretty much render us prostrate against all enemies of the United States. Majority of Americans, warfare is not something we typically worry about until it's upon us. We've been lucky to have administrations committed to peace through strength abroad. We remember the Reagan administration, even the Kennedy administration, for all its faults in the Bay of Pigs. It still was committed to anti-communism, and Bernie Sanders' administration would be the very opposite of that. When people say they want to vote for Bernie Sanders, I just wonder, can they imagine Bernie Sanders standing up to our enemies? Can they imagine Bernie Sanders telling Iran to stand down from its nuclear attacks? To telling North Korea that their aggression or their torture and exploitation of their own citizens will not be tolerated? Telling terrorist regimes in the Middle East that radical Islamic terrorism is a stain and a cancer on the proliferation of human decency. Can we imagine Bernie Sanders not kowtowing to our enemies? Can we imagine him leading our country from a position of strength rather than complete weakness and inferiority? I honestly can't imagine that, and I ask everyone that supports Bernie Sanders to tell me what they believe. I'm personally astounded by Bernie Sanders' massive popularity. I don't understand how the Democratic Party has been taken by, in my opinion, someone that is a leftist lunatic. And I honestly believe that Bernie Sanders would be a horribly dangerous president, a destructive president. He would absolutely undermine all the satisfaction that I've aforementioned. Some 80-something% satisfaction that Americans have. Why would you get rid of that by voting for someone who wants to fundamentally change the fabric of the United States? I think young people support Bernie Sanders because they don't have the historical context to repudiate what he's saying. There are people, obviously, you see people from Cuba who lived through the Castro regime that come to the United States and have very vehement opposition to any form of socialism. That's why you have a Republican faction of Cubans living in the state of Florida. And you have people that come from China, people that come from Russia, whose self-sufficiency has been cauterized, and they come to the United States, and all they want to do is build themselves from the ground up. And they become some of our best entrepreneurs. They become some of our best members of society, and most productive members of society. And I just don't understand why people would want to throw that away. And I think that Bernie Sanders is a master politician, especially in how he effectively, to be a good politician, you have to magnify flattering untruths and bury unflattering truths. And Bernie Sanders is the master of that. I think he is a master architect of manipulating young people and manipulating the most malleable political opinions. And I think that he is a very dangerous candidate for president of the United States. One thing I can commend Bernie Sanders on is at least he's running on something rather than these mundane, milquetoast Democrats who are just running on obstructing the president and running on reversing everything the president has done. I commend that he's at least stayed consistent in his beliefs, although his beliefs are incredibly flawed, incredibly destructive, and incredibly dangerous for the progeny of the United States. But I thank you for watching. Honestly, if you want more videos like this, if you want more of my commentary on some candidates or some political processes, please let me know in the comments below. Again, it's been Pat, and thank you for watching.